Dear colleagues, good morning, or good afternoon rather. I'm very pleased that we have with us today. It's a great honour for us to have Mr. Thierry Breton with us today. He is our Commissioner for the Internal Market and he's here for our structured dialogue. We are very pleased that he's with us today. We're going to be looking at two legislative initiatives on the net zero industry and the gigaset regulation. So we'd also like to thank the Commission for the February communique. We're talking about the zero net emissions target, and we've got to, of course, to understand this within the framework of the present political environment. And of course, these two legislative drafts are going to be very much part and parcel of our green transition and move towards a zero-emission green industry. Let me just remind you all, dear colleagues, that the idea of Net Zero Industrial Act is to support the capacity for the European Union to produce zero-emission technologies. And we have our ambition set for 2030. In order to meet the ambitions that we have established, and if we want to be able to produce net zero technologies, we need to have a framework, a simplified framework. And in order to do this, in order to actually develop these technologies, the Act will guarantee access to critical primary materials, which are required not just to diversify our supply, but enabling us also to recycle primary materials. We will reduce our dependence thereby on supplies from third countries. You all know very well the various debates that have been held up to now and the risks that are involved in over-dependency on supplies from third countries, and it's also a danger for us. So, Commissioner, thank you very much for coming along to our committee again, and I'd just like to invite you to present the two proposals to us, but also I'd like to thank you for your initiative that you and your colleagues at the Commission have presented to us. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. Christian, dear colleagues. Christian, I'm sorry, but I don't actually agree with your presentation, and this is not the first time, because I'm the one who is honoured to be here. It's not you, the committee, that should be honoured by my presence. I am honoured to be welcomed to the committee today. And I know that a number of colleagues have been waiting for me to come for the last 3.5 years. We've had very interesting debates where each one has its role. I'm very pleased to be here, to be able to have this debate with you and to have an exchange with you. You are the people who represent our citizens of the European Union. Of course, there are a number of different files that are ongoing. The Chip Act that we've been working on, and I've seen Dan just a little while ago. I saw Dan, and I hope that we'll be working again soon together on another trilogue. And I just wanted to congratulate you on the excellent work that Dan is doing, maintaining the Parliament's positions in the trilogue, and we're going to be an honest broker to make sure that this actually succeeds. It's important because companies are actually waiting for us. The projects, the plans are there, and we've got to move quickly. As you know as well, we also have the Data Act, the Cyber Presidents Act, and we also have EDIPA on defence. That's a legislative act which has only focused on enabling European defence industry to be able to step up its activities to meet the challenges that are ahead of us, and that's the sum of it. And I know that a number of countries are concerned that this instrument would not be actually deviated from its initial objective. That is not going to be the case because we are linked by the treaties. And we can talk about this, if you like, in the questions that answers session afterwards. But today, as the chair has invited me, today we're here to discuss two very important elements, two major proposals. Firstly, there is the first text, as you know, is on a Net Zero Industry Act. This is a response to the IRA in the USA. To be clear, it's not exactly drafted in those terms, but I think that was the trigger for this act, and we shouldn't hide our intentions. That's what we wanted to do. We in Europe, we wanted to respond in a robust manner to an issue. We have to move quickly on this as well. And then also a text on the Critical Raw Materials Act. And I would like to start, if you allow. I think everyone's convinced, for the reasons that you mentioned about the problems of production. Everyone is convinced that we need to have the Green Deal, industrial autonomy, space industry. We need the car industry, and we can't have this without having clear, clean tech and green production and a clear and dependable source of critical raw materials. This is strategic today, and I think we've seen with the geopolitical situation today that we need to establish new allies within Europe. We can't do this alone. We have to actually work clearly to develop our autonomy and limit our dependencies, and we've got to make sure that we're able to become a strong exporter as well in Europe, because Europe is not only here to import. We've also got another vocation, which is with our industrial bases. We want to be a large-scale exporter as well. Sometimes we have the impression that we actually are closed in upon ourselves, that we forget that Europe was and should be a large exporter as well. And in particular, as you know, this is one of the battles that I've been leading on in recent years on the car industry, or for the car industry, because we used to be a huge car exporter. The Chinese are now producing electronic cars, and they are leading the area there. But we're reduced to actually simply developing thermal motors for countries that don't actually move along. But we now need to actually get hold of this clean energy, clean technology, and produce that area. So let me look, first of all, at the Critical Raw Material Acts. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but you can't have a battery without lithium. You can't have wind power without rare earths. You can't have munitions without tungsten, etc., etc., etc. So our proposal is clearly articulated around three principles. One, we have a clear ambition. Our ambition is actually has actually been established here with figures and numbers. We just said what we're going to do to put together our national agencies, so joint procurement, and then also circularity. That's important. These are all important issues. I think it's always important to ensure that we, who are political institutions, political bodies, and of course the Commission, of course, feels it's important that we establish our ambitions simply so that we're able to actually set the tone and establish a target and get things going, especially because we have these transitions and industrial transitions behind it. So our ambition in this text, as anchored in this text, is that we can increase our manufacturing capacity, that we have three clear ambitions. And I'll remind you of those. Firstly, we want to make sure that we're able to meet about 10% of the strategic mineral mining the extraction. Is that ambitious? We are at 3%, 5% today. Well, so we're being ambitious. We are being ambitious. We want to multiply by 2 or 3 our extraction before 2030. So that's not nothing. And as I said, we are being very ambitious. We're going to develop this in the future. We're going to continue working with our partners to reduce our dependencies, but we want to make sure that we have solid partnerships and that we're able to be resistant to all developments, geopolitical developments and others, as we'll talk about later. And also, now that we've actually established a mapping, we've seen exactly where we want to go. We have updated every 6 months or so. We update this our mapping on the European territory, and we can see that we have nearly all of the minerals available to us in Europe, and so we can more or less cover 30 to 40% with reserves, etc. But we've got to do it with our methods and our rhythm, and also respecting diversity, biodiversity, and the environment, and also, of course, respecting the local populations. So. I think this is a good thing. It's also going to enable us to increase our partnerships. So we're going to be able to do things at home. And when we're actually going to be working with the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, or with Chile, we will say, well, we have got methods that have got to be adopted. We're going to propose to them how we do this, because it's more environmentally friendly, because it's more in respects workers' rights. So that's the first thing we want to look at. The second point is 40% of refineries, 40%. We're very, very low. We're very poor in that right now. So we are indeed establishing an ambition to actually increase this very quickly. So, of course, this is going to be easier than in the mining sector, perhaps, but it's very important because this is where the added value is found. This is where we can create stocks, and this is also where we can actually have some technological know-how, multiple technologies working together, and have a technological multiplier. So this is very realistic as well. And then recycling. We have also said that if we want to ensure that we have 15% of our we want to have 15% of recycled materials by 2030, and that is not, I don't think, over ambitious. These are compromises that have been reached with the Commission. We spend our days reaching compromises in the Commission, a bit like you. But this is the compromise that we have reached. So I think we've got to be honest. That's what we're here to do, that we've got to actually deal with the various factors. So by 2030, it's 15%, and this is an important for industry, that there is going to be a market. That's what is going to galvanise industry. A second point is that we've got to increase our partnerships. That's very important. And I think we've got to be very ambitious. We need partnerships because, I don't know, 17 or 18 strategic partnerships? 16 for cobalt, nickel, lithium, manganese, etc. So all of these materials aren't available for us at home. So we've got to have the correct strategic partners. With my team, I've been around the world. I've been looking to see what we've got. Mali's got huge reserves. Canada, the Congo, Chile as well. There are reserves, other parts of the world. We have identified the partnerships that we want to establish, depending on the way in which they work, of course, because we're not just going to work in any old manner. When we go into the field, we see actually, for example, the Chinese are often there. Very often they're there, but they don't have the methods that we agree with. It's brute extraction, perhaps brute in every sense of the word, in fact. And countries complain that there isn't a proper partnership with added value which is shared between partners, and that's what we're proposing to these countries. So we need to develop strategic partnerships, and it's important for us to have strategic projects so that we're able to use the right types of procedures and accelerated permits, giving us better access to financing as well. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to simplify things as well at home. We want to simplify the framework so that we're able to invest quickly in these technologies and these projects. And of course, if we want to meet our needs in critical raw materials for batteries, natural graphite, lithium, etc., we obviously have needs up to 2030 that have got to be met. So we have a lot of projects, but things are dragging along because of our red tape. And so our procedures are much too bureaucratic. That's what the companies are complaining about, without at the same time reducing the guarantees that we're giving through these procedures, because the procedures haven't come from nothing. They haven't evolved from nothing. Obviously, that's the heritage of what what was done in the past. They wanted to protect the environment. They wanted to do things in particular concerning mining. But we have seen that if we want to try and if we can actually speed up the administrative side of things, then we are actually providing greater security for the whole process. So we have an ambitious project, but it's important that we do this simplification project. Thirdly, we've got to be able to coordinate at European level as well. We have really got to work with the national agency for primary materials. We have very good national agencies. We've been working a lot on mines, of course, in the past, and we have a lot of know-how from that. A number of countries, in particular the countries that founded the European Union, but not just them, have a lot of experience in mining. So we've got to work together, work in a network, and we've got to also make sure that our know-how is available to partners outside of the EU. They've asked for that for mapping, for example. The Congo have asked us to carry out mapping of their resources that are underground, and there's a fantastic wealth there. So it's up to us in Europe to better work with our partners and evaluate the stocks, work on a strategic plans, give responsibility also to the companies, because they're the ones also that are involved in this on the front line. We've got to carry out audits as well to know what we have. Audits aren't to control or to monitor or to survey, but it's also to make sure that we know what we have, and working with experts who are involved in this to make sure that we know also how they can contribute to the value chain, which is also very important. And then our proposal also wants to improve the circularity economy, the circular economy. That's also very important. The second subject I wanted to talk about today is the Net Zero Industry Act. Now, it's very important. It is essential, as I said in the introduction today. Our partners in this, be it from at the commercial level or be it at the strategic level, like China, our partners here have already established legislation which enables them to attract industry into clean tech. We've talked about this before, and I'll try to speed up here because I can see I'm getting signs from the chair. But I think this is also very important. So we have responded to the situation with this Net Zero Industry Act. We have a proposal which is very ambitious. 2030 is the deadline. We want to have a capacity to cover 40% of our need in clean energies. And this is something which we know we can do. Our objective, our overall objective, has been broken down in depending on different technologies. For example, we want to try and increase our production of wind turbines and solar energy, other technologies. We've got other objectives. It's all broken down in the document. What's important, though, is that we share these common objectives. We have also, so that's our ambition. We also want to make sure that we're able to cover all of the technology that is needed for our green transition. These technologies are going to benefit from a reduction in the administrative burden. So we're going to have to also make it easier to get permits for these sandboxes and for the at least in new technologies, and that's very important. As you know, I have a very clear opinion on this. We feel that we need all technologies if we want to reach zero carbon by 2050. And as you know, we'll have to use nuclear as well. For the time being, it's 25% of the mix of our energy mix. We might be at 20% by 2050, as according to the experts. But in the meantime, we're going to have to double our capacity. So at the same time, we've got to double the share of nuclear in our mix if we want to make sure that we meet our deadline, which is total carbon zero by 2050. So as I said, without nuclear, I don't think we can have a strategic autonomy. This is a very important element. And I know Christophe said, Christophe might be saying, why are you saying that this is strategic? What is strategic is renewable, so that's quite right. But a point also on the targeted measures to make it easier to have for these technologies to get onto the market and for training opportunities as well. As we're going to be investing huge amounts of money in the green transition, I can give you the details later on if you want, we've also got to make sure that we understand the impact of public procurement in the consumption of these products. So we've got to look at the question of sustainability and resilience. This is a very important element, part of the overall framework. This is not at all protectionism, but I think that what we're trying to do is to diversify our technologies to make sure that we have secure sources of supply and that we do not depend on international sources. So this is not at all protectionism. I just want to say that we want to maintain our competitiveness, and we will be speaking about this later as well. We've made a communiqué on this. And then so we're going to have a package also for SMEs. Also, we have mentioned defence in this as well. It's very important that we're able to actually work with and understand the ADIRPA. There are countries I've been visiting all the countries that have a defence industry to see how we can increase the industrial basis of our defence industries in Europe, for all member states in the European Union, so that we're able to meet the need for munitions, ammunitions in particular. We have a huge need for that given the situation in Ukraine, but we have specific types of ammunitions that need to be produced between now and the end of the year. And my role is to ensure that we're able to step up our production of ammunitions to meet the capacity that is required. And I can talk about that later on if you like. But I'd also like to talk about other areas, such as the Cyber Resilience Act. But I'll stop at this stage before Christophe takes the microphone off me. Thank you very much for having given me a little bit more time than was foreseen.
It was our pleasure, Mr. Commissioner. And thank you very much for explaining the two legislative initiatives. But of course, we are well aware of how important it is to go very quickly to adopt them, and it's important for you to go to the member states, because there you can see exactly what the current capacity is, but in particular what the possibilities are for increasing and developing future projects. Now, if I could move on to the first round of comments from political groups, the coordinators. I would start with President Buzek on behalf of the EPP.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for your presence today and your presentation. Very important new legislative proposals, important step in the right direction. Congratulations for that. As an example, on the list of critical raw materials could be coking coal, and I called many times for keeping it on the list. And it is excellent news for steel industry, for example, but also for our transition, because without steel there will be no windmills or railways and so on and so on. And we import coking coal from United States, Mozambique, Australia, and it is also a huge carbon footprint. So our domestic producers are very, very much welcome from that point of view. The pressure on domestic producers of coking coal only increased. It's a very good example of your proposal. But two short questions. Critical Raw Material Act is key for the success of the European Green Deal, but it's very, very late from the point of view of our legislative term in office. We've got 1 year. Spanish, well, I'm not talking about Swedish, but Spanish and Belgian presidency. We should finish in March next year. Very little time. My goodness, what to do to be ready and to make it working before the end of legislative term. It's first issue, very important, I think. And second, Net Zero Industry Act, in some way answer to US Inflation Reduction Act. And we've got different views in European Parliament how to answer it. I think we can agree that reducing the regulatory burden of our industry, streamlining access for industry to European fund, but first of all, which is the most important, simplifying various procedures and regulations. So I'm wondering if you could explain once again, why do we suddenly need a new separate list not based on any methodology and create a somewhat artificial division into a list of strategic and critical raw materials? You explained the issue sometime, but I think it could be very, very clear for us because we would like to go forward with the legislative proposal as soon as possible. So it will be from my side. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Président. Au nom du groupe...
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, first of all, thank you very much for being here today. I decided to speak Romanian because my country has 16 of the 31 critical raw materials identified by the European Commission. We believe that in the EU there is a huge potential in terms of raw materials. I know we're not using them, we're not processing them, but we are here in a race of increasing imports without precedent. And earlier today, a company presented a study to us that said, well, they said, why are we so naive that we would rather import solar panels instead of producing them? We would we would rather bring lithium, and we don't bring lithium here to process it, but we buy the products with lithium. So we're now 98% dependent on China in terms of solar panels. Well, this runs in the face of a strategy of independence of independence of the EU, since we have such a huge rate of dependency, and there are other fields of a dependency rate of over 80%. So what you've put forward with the net zero industry and the critical raw materials, this package should be the following. We know what the EU has to do. We know the steps that we need to take so as to make sure that we are independent and we are secure, that protects us from unexpected situations that can happen anywhere, including in the South China Sea. Now, another very important thing is that we understand that we cannot become more and more dependent in these strategic fields. We cannot become carbon neutral if we just keep importing everything, because at some point our suppliers of solar panels, just an example, but the same thing about batteries, could say that they double the price, or that they don't have enough capacity to supply solar panels, and this would put us on the spot in terms of our carbon neutrality objectives. So what we want to do in the EP is to make sure that all of these things allow us to meet our 2050 objectives, to give the industry a clear roadmap of carbon neutrality and the support that it needs, and to make sure that we leave this age of innocence and naivete behind us. And let me congratulate, because not many commissioners have talked about the EU industry, about raw materials, about strategy, and these are very important things for the EU. And thank you and congratulations for this.
Au nom du groupe Renew.
On behalf of Renew.
Merci, Monsieur le...
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioner. I'll be speaking on behalf of our coordinator, Martina Dlabayova, who unfortunately can't be here today. So she asked me to read her contribution as vice coordinator. Now, for her, Net Zero Industry
Acts sont très liés.
And the Critical Raw Materials Act are very much linked, and to reach the goals of one will not be possible without reaching the goals of the other. With that in mind, the two laws need to be balanced. Martina recalls that the SMEs emit almost 2/3 of the total emissions from companies in Europe, and these SMEs will most likely consume a lot of raw materials for their production. As a result, the impact and implications of these two dossiers must be reflected in the aid provided to SMEs and other pertinent files. I'm sure we can count on you and the Commission for this. Then creating applicable tools to be able to protect our companies' competitiveness will be essential, but what will be key is that the Commission helps Member States to apply a legislative framework in a harmonized manner by clearly highlighting the obtaining of results. We hope the Commission will have the guarantees to guarantee this. So what sort of mechanism will be used to balance the situation between Member States, and what sort of economic opportunities will there be for each? And lastly, procedures for public procurement calls often discourage SMEs because it's very often complex and bureaucratic to apply. Now, Ms. Dlabayova would like to know whether the Commission is willing to provide technical assistance to SMEs regarding respecting criteria, the sustainability and resilience for the public procurement procedures in order to ensure their active participation. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Greens, Mr. Kieran-Cuff.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, and thank you, Commissioner. In order for Europe to stay in the lead of the green transition, we need to foster and develop green industry. the Net Zero Industry Act has the potential to revitalise and invigorate European industry and put European industry at the heart of the green transition. And there are millions of jobs in the EU that benefit from renewables and other climate-friendly industries. However, there is still a lack of investment and clear guidelines for a fair labour policy and a simple application for subsidies. This Act has the potential to create further jobs in climate-neutral industries across the EU. However, some aspects of the proposal do remain questionable. The emphasis on carbon storage as a net zero technology for our 2030 climate communities, I believe that is misplaced. What I do want to know, Commissioner, is why are we creating new funding sources when we still have not spent the €290 billion of the Recovery and Resilience grants? Instead of creating more complications for industries to access funding, we should surely be cutting down on red tape for investments and use the existing framework that is in place. So the EU industries could be leading in the green transition, but the industry's modernisation is essential for creating these green jobs, clean jobs, and ensuring a clean transition away from fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Au nom du groupe ID.
On behalf of ID, Mr. Botga. Thank you, Chairman. Welcome to the Commissioner. Well, I would start by looking at the context, since at the global level it's undeniable that China is the only player who is making a profit out of the conflict in Ukraine and Russia's invasion there. And basically, they are able to buy gas and oil at very competitive prices for their national industries. In the meantime, there are studies such as the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which has shown that 37 out of the 44 necessary technologies for the green transition, China already has a significant advantage. So we are behind in terms of competitiveness in the defense sector, aerospace and biotechnology. So on the basis of that context, I'm wondering, this 40% internal production for green technology, this aim, when we've got 80% coming from China now, from which sources and where will these resources be located to try and fill in such a significant gap? And secondly, based on the documents we've read up till now, it's not clear what the approach will be for nuclear, so I'd like to ask the Commissioner whether he could provide us with some information on that. Thank you.
Grazie molto, Paolo. The name of the ECR, Professor Krasnodębski, our Vice Chair and Coordinator of ECR.
Dziękuję bardzo. I will speak in Polish. Ja mam trzy krótkie pytania.
I have three brief questions on critical raw materials. Commissioner, what is the perspective that some of those materials would be extracted in Europe? Because I read there are sources of lithium in Sweden, there are also in Serbia, but also there is resistance because of ecology, because you cannot extract raw materials from the ground without damaging the environment. So is there a possibility, because I think without that we will never have strategic autonomy. Now, my second question on net zero industry. Unlike our green colleague, I must stress that this document expresses a spirit of realism while pointing out how important it is to be able to store CO2. But it's quite unclear what is the status of nuclear energy. It's not quite clear expressed in the document, so perhaps you could say a few words on that as well. Now, secondly, there's also something else. You said that this is a reaction on the American IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, but there is one thing missing here, namely the money, the funds. Because we know we are facing a choice. Either we allow member states to increase public funding, or there is going to be a European solution put in place, or possibly we give up on financial support altogether. So is this an adequate response? That's my question. Now, finally, my third question on what you said as well. On EDRPA, we know we have a war in progress. We don't know when it's going to end. Putin now declared that he would station nuclear weapons in Belarus. There is a conflict with China going on, so geopolitics are important. We have to develop defense industry. And the fact that you have been visiting places in Europe to see where munitions can be produced and encouraging them to produce more, if this were to be said 2 years ago in this chamber, people would be saying that it's impossible. So for defense industry, how are we framing the development of our defense industry without the green strategy? Because tanks need to be built with steel. In order to have steel, then you need specific raw material, coking, coal, which will be mentioned by my colleague, and so on and so forth. So how is that going to be combined with our green aspirations? Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the left, Mr. Botenga, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, thank you for your introduction. I think, well, indeed, as you said, some of us, at least, have discovered that the U.S. Is not necessarily the ally we expected, and there's a bit of naivete to this. So, I mean, if anyone else has profited from this war in the Ukraine and hasn't felt the impact of the sanctions, I mean, it's the U.S. Let's be clear about that. And the IRA is their version of a new industrial policy that targets, in part, the deindustrialization of Europe. So within that framework, your response to all of that is a bit of a carrot policy. As you said, you're offering a carrot, a fairly significant one, in fact, quite a significant part of incentives and financial support, as well as a work on permits, procedures, and less bureaucracy for companies to be able to do what they want quicker without, of course, affecting their profits. Well, I have two questions. In this dance of veils to entice industry, do you really think we can end up winning out if we compare this with the US's Inflation Reduction Act? Do you think that the response we're proposing is really up to scratch in terms of competing with the IRA? Secondly, the first draft, the first leaks of this was significantly criticized by the trade unions, who said that, well, you're offering a lot of money, but the conditions and guarantees in terms of social and employment impact are almost non-existent. So could I ask you, are you counting on some sort of trickle down, or are there clear guarantees? In addition to your carrot, do you have a stick behind it? Thank you.
Botenga.
Thank you, Mr. Botenga.
Avec ça, nous
With that, we've wrapped up the first round of comments. Over to you, Mr. Commissioner, for your reactions to the questions and comments.
Je sais que c'est très difficile en 6 minutes, mais
I know it's very difficult in 6 minutes, but take the time you need. We do have a long list for the second round as well. Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you all for your questions. First of all, Mr. Buzek. Mr. Buzek. On coking coal, well, I can confirm that that raw material is still on the list of critical raw materials. That's good news for the steel industry. As you said, it is a key element in that. On the timetable, you were wondering, you're absolutely correct. It is tight to negotiate things, but we really do have to get down to this as soon as possible because we have to send out a message very quickly to all of our companies. So without wanting to interfere in the co-legislators' work, I will simply repeat all of the comments from the whole of the industrial sectors that I am often in contact with. We want to be able to get this up and running as soon as possible. We know, some of you in the room know, that Iris Squared was adopted quickly, despite the very lengthy necessary debate, 9 months. 12 months. So it can be done. The CHIP Act, I hope we'll be able to wrap that up in a year as well. So it is possible that it's strategic. We can do it. You can count on me and my services to really push hard for this, and I'll make a commitment to that here. And we do hope that the European Parliament on its side will be able to align things with all of the committees that are legitimately interested in working on this. On net zero, the Industry Act. Well, the idea is to focus on key technologies with automatic benefits for all net zero technologies. Some benefits are necessary. It would make it easier to absorb this by member states rather than have a two-level approach, and that's why we've done it this way. In the response to the IRA, I think it is a robust response. Just 30 seconds, Mr. Buzek wants to come in.
Mr. Commissioner, methane regulation could be very dangerous for our domestic coking coal production. That's very important. Sorry to disturb.
C'est bien noté, hein?
Well, yes, I've
So we manage this very carefully, but we are fully aware of that. And it's absolutely strategic. You're right to say it. Je vais passer maintenant.
Now I'll move on to Dan Nika. Well, you can see this is information given here of the 31 critical materials. 16 are in Romania. We can find them a bit everywhere, but we do find a lot in Romania. The other day we were in Sweden, and the day we arrived in northern Sweden, in Kiruna, they announced the discovery of rare earth. There isn't rare earth in a little bit. Up there, there's 1 million tons in the north of Sweden. So there's a lot of materials. But I'll come back to that. So we do really have to act right along the whole value chain. 97% of the solar panels come from China, it was said. Well, we know that that technology was invented, developed, and manufactured and produced in Europe at the beginning. And indeed, we let all of that go over the years. As you know, in the multiple battles I carry out as a European Commissioner, one of the first battles I started was the return of our industry. And I think we have neglected our industry somewhat. to the detriment of the consumers. Now, what I don't mean by that is we should neglect the consumer. No, we have the consumer objectives, but behind all of that, there's products, and behind the products, there's know-how, and then there's jobs. Political life is not or, it's and, so both consumers and industry. And I will not stop putting industry back at the heart of the discussions, not just for out of protectionist concerns, but rather I think it's part of history. I mean, when we presented this with my colleague Frans Timmermans, there was a question from the journalists on industry. And France, I mean, he can speak because he's in his second mandate. He said, well, we were too naive. We've ignored industry, and that sounds like music to my ear, I said, because we've always neglected industry. But now we need to act and act very quickly, and that's what we're doing with these legislative proposals, which are reindustrialization proposals. That's how they should be understood. Reduce our dependency, yes, but above all, reindustrialize and maintain tools throughout the industry, throughout the production chain, so that we can guarantee supply sources. We want to ensure our strength in the relationships. Now I'll take on the questions from Martina via Christophe Grudler. A very important question, which doesn't surprise us, of course, Christophe, because she has highlighted SMEs, and that's a subject that she has been battling in favor of for very well. Yes, the SMEs are at the heart of things. The figures you've given us, 2/3 CO2 emissions, we've said 90%. Well, sometimes they emit less, but we'll concentrate, first of all, on support for public purchasers and public procurement and suppliers for the SMEs. First of all, we decided that the Commission shall issue guidelines on criteria and resilience assessment and sustainability for certain products. We also want to create data for public procurement and make access easier for SMEs. And the decision makers will have the possibility of intervening to determine the securitization and resilience and to reshift things back to European production where where solely for price purposes that they haven't been able to do that. So we try to reorient this, and that will involve SMEs as well. On the level playing field between member states, that is an important issue, of course. And that's precisely why we need legislation, so that we have the same rules everywhere across the board. Those member states that have the greatest fiscal possibilities will ask for a temporary framework, and that is a potential distortion within the single market. So I fought to propose a legislative act which allows us to harmonize and will allow us to coordinate things between member states so that everyone is playing under the same rules and be able to apply them with a solid governance through the platform that we're proposing setting up. So that's very important. I think that's it for Christophe. Kieran Cuff, the Greens, over there. On financing, well, that is a significant question. We have financing available still in Repower EU. This was done, first of all, to deploy technologies that would allow us to produce carbon zero energy. There's also Next Generation EU, the RFF. There's Invest EU, structural funds. So for each of the financial envelopes, we can see how we can adjust these. Certain member states still have availability in the Next Generation EU, but what we want to ensure is that each member state has a solution. Those who have the fiscal room for maneuver can do this. Those who don't have other sources of financing. So we want to ensure that all member states can have access to financing which will correspond to their technological platforms within their countries. We're also working on a so-called sovereign fund. Worked on that in July, and we will have an opportunity to come back to that. So I think that covered those questions. Then Mr. Borka. Targets. The 40% goal. Well, first of all, it's a goal which translates a quantifiable criteria. It's designed to guarantee manufacturing capacity in the Union by 2030 for all of the strategic elements, which will allow us to go carbon neutral. So this criteria will once again allow us to reach a goal. We think it's reasonable, realistic. But as you said, of course, we'll have to have significant means made available. They are targeted behind each of these goals. By definition, they're of course jobs. Because I repeat this incessantly, we need a huge amount of resources to develop and deploy green energy. But if we have to go and buy them elsewhere, I mean, we're exporting our jobs. So the battle we're carrying out is trying to have an industrial base, and behind that is jobs, and it's high quality jobs as well. So that's something that's really important. I'm trying to speed up things here. Mr. Krasnodebski. Well, thanks for the support on the low carbon storage. I think that's very important to recall that on nuclear. Here, I'd like to be very clear on nuclear. It is included, once again, it's included for 3 reasons, and these are significant. First of all, simplification for everything that has to do with manufacturing aspects. Secondly, on innovation towards more high-performance technology, the 3rd or 4th generation reactors, but also the SMRs, the future reactors and small reactors, the new generation reactors, and also, which is very significant for nuclear, is everything to do with the fuel. Including clean fuels. So this also covers fusion. So I think we've covered the whole range. Now, there might be one small thing which I mentioned with Christophe earlier, is that indeed in the annex which has been issued, this annex, and I think that's where there's a misunderstanding, and perhaps you can correct that from the Parliament. In the annex, as it appears today, it's called
Zero Technologies. Effectively.
And indeed, we don't include nuclear there. So what does it mean to be in that annex? It means that there will be a very specific speeding up of the permit process. And we know for nuclear, you can't have a sped up permit because it's not the legislator that's going to speed that up. It's going to be the nuclear agencies. So by definition, they're excluded. That's why they're elsewhere. And I would repeat that because it might be a small confusion there. I mean, they are covered, they are elsewhere. So I really do think that today we are covering the broad majority of the nuclear. Perhaps we should have renamed this annex strategic renewable technology, because this is really for renewables, but nuclear does appear very explicitly elsewhere in the text. So we thought it was important to perhaps recall that. Now, we don't directly include additional funding, but we have temporary aid for state aid. There's also European funds, there's the ETS, which are available to the member states, which would allow us to finance things there as well. Defense and the Green Deal. Today, to be clear, support for Ukraine is extremely important. I mean, some might even say vital. And what's important there is the urgency there. And so, obviously, we have to respond to Ukraine's need when we're talking about these munitions. That's why, with the Ministries of Defense, we proposed a 3-pillar plan. The fact that member states will be able to give from their munition stocks, and they'll be half reimbursed. There'll be a call for tender. That's the second million. And then we want to ensure that the European industrial defense industry base will be able to respond to be able to supply to replace the munitions which will be given to Ukraine for our member states. So I can tell you that today there is a real defense industry base in Europe. Obviously, coordination lies with member states and the companies, but what we're doing is we're looking at the value chains, we're bringing skills together. We're doing a bit like we did for the vaccines, and that allows us to increase our production, just as we did for the health industry. We'll do this for the defense industry.
C'est tout. Comment? C'est tout. Ah, Monsieur Botenga.
Oui, merci.
Alors, Monsieur Botenga, pour...
Mr. Botenga? Okay, for the last one, on the question of jobs. Well, I don't have any comments to make on the leaks, but what I can do is reassure you that together with my colleague Nicola Schmidt, we are ensuring that our proposals will lead to quality jobs. We're following this up very closely with companies. So all of our efforts will contribute to increasing training of European workers, and they're increasing their employability. So there is a real significant training section behind all of this. That's very important. So I think that it is an aspect that is fully covered today, and that is also why we are fighting on behalf of this proposal, which we hope will get the support of the Parliament.
Thank you very much. We have got another list of comments. We've got some 20 different speakers. So I'm asking if you can actually keep me very brief in your replies, because it's going to be very difficult to get cover everything in time. Let me start. Mrs. Bentley, APP. 1 minute.
Yes, I'll hold it under a minute. I'm rather more optimistic than our colleague Mr. Busek concerning critical raw materials. I think we've done a lot of preparation. 2 years ago, we worked together with our colleagues, and I think we're well prepared. And I think on the council side, it's prepared as well. So I think that could be concluded within a year, indeed. Now, we are aware that we have to work in a preventative fashion. My question to you, Commissioner, what I'm missing is the voice of the producers, those who are going to put the lithium in the batteries, these people who need the efficient engines. I think their voices are too weak. When we speak about these projects, we need to talk to the enterprises and companies. How are you going to ensure that we have an active policy, that we address the enterprises so they can have long-term contracts, because that's the only way they're going to have these long-term projects realized in the future.
Thank you. Signora Patrizia Toia, prego.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner. I greatly appreciate the strategy you've presented and which you've been promoting. But I would ask you, do you think that beyond the technological list that you presented, which I would restrict somewhat more, but don't you think that a stronger intervention in Europe, I mean, okay, as you said, the member states to share their skills with the stakeholders and to try and get the investors involved. Couldn't you try to help and direct the choices of industry somewhat better so that I mean, I'm a federalist. I think we need to have a European Minister for Development that could help concentrate the choices. I get the impression, I don't know whether it's your impression as well, that the industrial world is hesitant to take advantage of the opportunities that Europe is presenting. I mean, if you want to have electric mobility, we need to have production for this as well. I mean, we do have the CHIP Act, but there will be industries that develop and become European champions? I haven't really understood how this will happen. I think we need to be a bit stronger in our interventions to provide clearer direction to industries to make their choices.
Monsieur Grudler, sa propre intervention maintenant. C'est vous. Oui.
Mr. Grudler, do you want to make your own statement? Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. Well, we very much welcome the creation of this Net Zero Industrial Act. I think it's an excellent thing that we're going to try and facilitate the creation of our own industries and technologies here in Europe. But I think that there are a few gaps in this, and that's where's the financing? The IRA in America has got some over $360 trillion, and if we want to actually facilitate the creation of factories in Europe, that's a very good thing. But if there's no financing, then there's nothing. And ERA is not the only thing that they're doing. It's $750 million in the USA are being given alongside ERA to the hydrogen sector. So I think the Commission is going to have to come up now with a European fund, a European sovereign fund, and perhaps look again at the MFF so that we can make sure that we have the money, that we have fresh money. If we don't do that, I think we might as well pack up our own industries and send them off. And then on the NZIA, you talked about one of my ideas around one of the objectives, and that was to ensure that all of the net zero technologies can be recognised as being strategic by the President of the Commission and to deal with them as equals. But the work on that is only starting, I believe. Thank you.
Mrs. Virkunen, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. I think these both initiatives, they are very much needed. And it is clear also that the European regulatory environment needs to change in order to attract and boost these important investments. And especially I welcome the initiatives to reduce our administrative burden and to simplify permitting processes, because we know that this is one of the main obstacles now in Europe, and we have to really now push the member states also to take serious actions here, because this matters if we want to create European value chains for critical raw materials. I think also that the proposed initiatives on skills and research and development, that they are much needed, but however, more concrete actions is needed, especially with regards to critical raw materials. And like many of colleagues here earlier, I'm also a little bit disappointed to this nuclear power part. I think that the Act fails to take fully into account the potential of nuclear energy, but of course it was very promising that Commissioner said that they are covered in Annex, so I think we have to look now very sharp that if they are covered enough. But then I would like to make positive note also about the inclusion of carbon capture and storage. I think it's very important because we simply cannot reach our climate goals without developing and deploying our carbon capture and storage, and I think it's important that it's included now here.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bronis Rope, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Commissioner, thank you for this opportunity to meet you and to exchange our views. And if you will react, I will be doubly pleased. Indeed, we need to calculate and to take stock of what we have now, what will be needed in the future. And this will form the basis for our good planning. Already today, we can start using much less steel in construction and to substitute it with trees. For example, in my country, the electric poles are from steel and from cement, from concrete, whereas in other countries, trees are used for this purpose. Next is the batteries, and buying back the batteries. Currently, the price for buying back the batteries is just a couple of euro, but the value of the battery is much higher. That is something we could regulate. Also, my next question. I have heard about plans to start production of natrium batteries. Have you heard about it?
Thank you very much, President. And thank you very much, Mr. Breton, for joining us this afternoon and discussing this. Heat pumps. We need a large number of these. Solar cells we need as well. My question is, does your legislation contain a scenario for locating the industries for these products? And do they take into consideration European competition? And the question about nuclear energy, your concerns concerning a dependence on uranium supplies, what's your view on that?
Thank you so much. Madame Isabella Klopp.
Panie komisarzu, szanowni państwo, zachowanie...
Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, it is good news that coking coal is on the list of critical materials presented by the Commission. That's something that we were calling for both here and in the plenary. But for years, the extractive industries have been explaining to the European Commission how important this strategic material is for development. Commissioner, now is the time to convince members of Parliament to support the list of critical materials. Member States should not give up on extraction of coking coal in future as well, because importing it from the other end of the world to Europe is not justified economically or ecologically for that matter. And no European regulation, and that's the issue that's the most important, or any regulations on cutting methane emissions, this shouldn't hamper the extraction of coking coal in Europe. I cannot imagine a situation that by 2027 we would have to close Polish coal mines that are the main source of production of coking coal in Europe. The presence of coking coal on the list should be sufficient as a signal that we cannot develop without coking coal. And thank you personally, Commissioner, for your understanding of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Salini, please. Prego.
Grazie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Just 1 minute, one idea. Amongst the issues contained in your proposal, quite rightly, we see the ferrous metals for the production of green steel, but for critical materials, it's considered not streeting. But transforming the steel industry into a sustainable industry requires valuing steel production through recycling of ferrous metals. Now, in 2 years' time, the demand for ferrous metals and metal waste will be twice the demand because we export it. The steel industry is key in industrial balance and moving towards sustainability. So it's important that ferrous waste becomes a strategic material as well.
Signor Danti.
Grazie, signor Presidente.
Thank you, Commissioner, for being here, and thank you for the strategic design you've presented to us, not just this afternoon, but the comprehensive approach you've had to European industrial policy. This is important for European competitiveness and security, and I think because of that, we've been working after so many discussions with the other committees in the Parliament to try and ensure we can finish the Cyber Resiliency Act to ensure security. Now, from a strategic point of view, I think this proposal on raw materials is key, and I would like to stress how important it is. But I do have a question on the supply of these raw materials from outside the EU. There are a series of trade agreements. Don't we need to have a wider range, a wider spectrum of trade agreements to cover these materials rather than individual agreements with individual countries? Because perhaps it would be a good idea to look at the trade policy as well.
Mr. Heisel, please.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Commissioner, thank you for your proposal, which certainly is going in the right direction, but still I have some questions. As for the 10% target for the critical raw materials produced in the EU, do you think really that this is a sufficient amount in order to decrease substantially our dependence on the import from the third countries like China? Is there any impact assessment that can prove it, that it really will contribute to this goal? Then secondly, permitting procedures. Here I want to touch the role of the local communities, which should be really essential, but should it override the public interest in some area? You know how it is difficult sometimes to get the agreement. So how to put it all this into balance? And then how could possibly be permitting procedures harmonized across the EU, and how can this process be accelerated from the EU level? Because, you know, for example, in Hungary, it takes about some months, and in Slovakia, it takes about some years in order really to launch a new mine. And nuclear, very finally. So, am I correct to understand, est-ce que je comprends bien que c'est seulement...
Do I understand properly that this is a question where you said that you haven't included it in this technology, only we're talking about permits, which permits are given by the nuclear agency. Is there not some other reason for you not including nuclear in this list? Madam de Castillo.
The Net Zero Industry Act will improve conditions for investment in zero net technologies and give a priority to net zero strategic projects. Regrettably, there are other crucial sectors for our competitiveness that not fall under this category, and you have mentioned some of those. It is true, this is the case, that nuclear energy and sustainable alternative fuels technologies will be eligible for state support and subject to quicker permitting rules. However, since they are not be considered strategic net zero technologies, support from European funds will be limited. Our international counterparts have not set such limitation. As you know, the US Inflation Act has made available $40 billion of federal funds to these technologies. So if we have to offset the massive financial leverage of measures such as this, we should not be short-sighted on the sector we have boosted. But in any case, I would like to ask you, how quickly will the sectors identified be able to access funding under REPowerEU and other schemes?
Thank you so much. Mr. Niklas. Mrs. Han will speak on the slot of the Greens. Please.
Thank you, dear Commissioner. It's a real pleasure to work with you currently at the CHIPS Act and as well as on the Critical Raw Materials Act in the future. And I thank you for your draft proposal. And I appreciate the provisions towards the circularity of all critical raw materials in our economy. However, the proposed recycling capacity target for 2030 of 15% is not ambitious enough. You were mentioning before, it's a kind of compromise, but I think there's still something to do on it. And how could we ensure that the recycling capacity of the Union allows virtually 100% of recycling of the critical raw materials? And as a second point, at first sight, we have in the current CRMA draft a blind spot on possible measures to reduce the demand for strategic raw materials. So I wonder why you didn't introduce corresponding provisions, because, for instance, the ITRE committee is responsible for energy matters, as we know, and facing the risk of a supply shortage this winter, and we knew how important it would be to reduce the energy demand. Correspondingly, we need sufficient plans for critical raw materials, knowing that all our political objectives would be more easily reached with efforts to reduce the overall demand by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kelly, please.
Thank you very much. Sorry for missing part of the meeting because I had a group over from Ireland. I listened to Commissioner Breton. I was pleased with what he said, but he mentioned about what needs to be done. My question is, how is it going to be done? How are we going to reduce the administrative burden, which he spoke about, and when? How are we going to utilise the resources we have within Europe, particularly in relation to critical raw materials, when some countries have policies of leave it in the ground, import it from some other country, and then we will miraculously decrease emissions by so doing. So I think it's important that we would look at these issues and see where we're going, and also the question of nuclear energy, which I agree with. But again, there are countries who have a political policy of no nuclear energy, regardless of the logic. Will the Commission encourage people to look at this anew and be practical? Because, as you said, we won't reach our targets without it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Penkova, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Breton. It was pretty interesting and useful to hear what you had to present on the two important files. In the Net Zero Industry Act, there is a direct reference to the state aid. The new proposal basically suggests that to incentivize more production in Europe, we have to rely on the amount of state aid each member state can provide. Basically, the existing current state aid provision suggests that a company can get the same amount of aid from a member state that it could get from any other source under the same condition. Don't you think this contradicts with some of the main policies we have in the EU, like the cohesion policy? Wouldn't that lead to a fragmentation of the internal market? And with that approach, how can you guarantee that we're not going to divide Europe into two rich and poor countries? The risk here is that some of the companies would prefer to go to the member states that can provide more state aid and move away from the poor countries, which would also distort the labor market. Yes, we're going to create more jobs, but where are those new jobs going to be? And a final remark, yes, indeed, we need cheap and reliable energy supply to make all that work. And I'm glad to hear that we've already had the realization that to have a balanced energy mix, we need renewables together with base load power, which is nuclear as the lowest, like near zero carbon emissions. But please pay attention also to the existing and current technologies in nuclear, not only to the new and upcoming ones if we want to achieve the target soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Svetlina. Mr. Schaller Baros.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I would like to address you in Hungarian. Köszönöm a szót.
Thank you very much for the floor. When we're talking about the competitivity of the European industry, we can see negative tendencies as well. According to reports, the majority of European enterprises feel that in Europe, the business climate is worse than 3 years ago. It took a long time to create a new industrial policy, and there have been objections to it. Other potential objection is that no feasibility study was made before the new industrial policy, and financial instruments are lacking. Does the Commission intend to change that? And another question, nuclear energy is very important for us to maintain a secure energy supply and to reach our climate targets. But Madam von der Leyen said that nuclear energy is not of strategic importance to Europe. Does the Commission think that they can maintain they can... Okay, stop.
Kiitoksia. In Finnish, please. Esitys on tervetullut.
The proposal is one we can welcome. Let me give you an example. We have the EU is the largest producer of solar energy in 2007, and we were basing our production on other countries. But then China invested in innovation and production, and then we had tariffs, and we didn't do our homework about how to produce the components. We just completely lost this industry. And now the EU, quite rightly, wishes to improve its position vis-a-vis critical raw materials from mining all the way to processing and refining. So we're going to end up, are we going to be just competing with China, or how are we going to manage this?
Mr. Fuchsland, please. Thank you, Chair. The EU produces only around 10% of its solar panels domestically, and we're about to lose our wind turbine industry if we do not act. Politics has failed, and we have made ourselves too reliant on foreign powers. We made this happen. Now it's time to revert. And that's why I share completely the main objectives of the Net Zero Industrial Act. It's time for this act to be added to the Fit for 55 package and the Repower EU objectives. And I think especially important is the permitting, the simplified and targeted procedure for permitting, so we can get our projects out there in the society to work as fast as possible. And I think we are way too slow today, and that is why that's an important element. And I want to ask the Commission if you can elaborate. Do you think your text, how much will it change if we adopt it as it is when it comes to permitting? Could we improve it certain places? Because this is certainly one of the key factors in our industrial transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, Mr. Bogovic.
Gospod komisar, najlepša hvala za vaše pobude, s katerimi se strinjam.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your initiatives. I very much appreciate what you're doing. The industrialization and competition in Europe is something which we really need to fight to protect. And very often the most important obstacle is represented by the lack of critical raw materials for our industries, as well as the very high cost of energy in the last couple of months and years. My question is about how we use nuclear energy, which I support, because energy production from nuclear sources is much more effective and efficient than wind energy. We've got to really think of energy in terms of neutrality, comparing one source of energy to another. We should be dealing with them in a neutral fashion. And we've got to guarantee the possibility of actually moving closer to this type of energy in Europe, to nuclear energy, and not creating obstacles to the use of nuclear.
Thank you very much. So my first point on this whole strategy is just a remark, and that is the question to make sure that all regions profit from the investments we're doing here. So what we must not undergo is to just redo the industrial investments that we already have, but also see that new investments will flow into those regions that are at the moment lagging behind, that are trapped in the development trap, make sure that they have possibilities to also overcome. This will ensure the greater cohesion in Europe, making us truly stable and more stronger in the world. But also, since the topic was mentioned a lot of time, I want to come to the problem of nuclear. What I'm surprised is, if we look at this energy source from a clear, neutral standpoint, I'm really surprised where everybody's asking for more investments in the most expensive energy form there is. Wind is way cheaper. Solar is way cheaper than any investment that we could do in nuclear. Also, the building time, if you look at, for example, Hinkley Point, takes us way longer than anything that we need to accomplish in the future. So my question here is, what are you planning exactly in doing, using nuclear as an energy of the future, when this future really is 10 to 20 years ahead after the first nuclear plant will be finished?
Thank you so much. Monsieur le Commissaire.
Yeah. Merci.
Well, thank you very much for those questions. I can't really answer to each question according to the chair for lack of time, so I'm going to try and summarise my response. There are 4 major subjects that were addressed. The first, I've heard a lot about nuclear, and I'm going to talk on that, but the first thing was financing. There's a problem of permits, problem of financing, and there's a problem also of industrial competitiveness. So these seem to be the 4 main themes that were addressed. First of all, on nuclear. We've got to be clear. And here I'm speaking as the European Commissioner for the Internal Market, Competitiveness, Single Market. Now, as you know me well, there's no ideology in what I'm saying. I'm trying to simply be factual and pragmatic in my approach. The first thing, though, is that energy is, according to the treaties, it comes under the member states' initiatives, and they are responsible for their energy policies. But as we are a community and we work together, I must say, I would like people not to say that A is good and B is bad, or what they're doing is good and bad. I think that when energy policy is actually, it's something which is under the national mandate and not the community. And so that's what the treaties wanted. That's what the founding fathers wanted. So those who want to have nuclear have it. It's their choice. They haven't done it in any off-the-cuff way. They've made a choice, and those who don't have it have decided not to do it for reasons. And we have to respect the choices that our neighbouring countries have made. Let's respect the treaties and respect the choices of the neighbouring countries. That's the first thing. Secondly, in this context, we've got to be neutral from a technological point of view. When we're talking about energy, decarbonised energy, net zero energy. So there's a little energy which is actually decarbonised. This is what we're actually putting forward in the Net Zero Industrial Pact. All of the industries that I mentioned, and here again, including nuclear energy, these are all net zero technologies or energies. Article 30.A gives us the scope of nuclear in this area, and it's all stated. But let me just say something from a scientific perspective. We've carried out calculations, myself and with my team. We've looked at what's been done around us. I haven't actually checked everything, but if you look at this and you multiply by 2, you get the production of electricity on the European continent over the next 30 years in order to meet the net zero target. 25% of ours comes from nuclear, and that's because of the choice of member states who wanted to go along that road. In 2050, if we actually continue, we're going to have to double, and then we will have at least 20% of nuclear in the mix, having doubled our production. So those who have nuclear will no doubt also increase their use of nuclear, and that's really the trend that we've seen from today's vantage point. As concerned the Net Zero Industry Act, and I'll go back to what's been said, it is clearly mentioned in Article 3AA. It talks here about nuclear, but I don't want to hide anything from you. With my teams, I was actually ensured that this actually was be put into the text because I believe that we have to be neutral and objective. So it's done, and it's written very clearly what's covered. Now, the last point on this is that, indeed, nuclear, strictly speaking, does not actually figure in Annex 9. Is it Annex 9? Sorry, Annex 1. Annex 1. Many jumped on that and said, but there's no nuclear. What a drama. But no, I said, no, it's not there. It's elsewhere. Because under the heading didn't allow us to put it here, or because there was something that wasn't quite explicit enough, or there was something misleading, as they say in good French. No, we're talking here about the strategic net zero technologies, and that's where we have the list of different technologies, and we have a number of particular things, such as we want to accelerate permits for those technologies. And nuclear doesn't fit in here because we can't accelerate permits for nuclear, because permitting for the nuclear in the nuclear field is something which is very specific, and it's in the hands of the European Atomic Energy Agency. So it can't be included here. Now, but that doesn't mean that nuclear is not strategic. Personally, I feel that nuclear is actually indispensable. And it's absolutely indispensable if we want to meet our target for 2050. So therefore, we say it is indispensable, it is strategic, and it is fundamental. And it is a minority. It's a minority energy indeed, but it is absolutely essential for us to achieve our objectives. So should we perhaps re-qualify this annex? Because here we're only looking at those technologies where which are renewable. So on the one hand we have renewable, and on the other hand we have nuclear, and they both belong, strictly speaking, to this proposal. So if we can try to avoid debating this again, and I know that this is a debate that's ongoing in member states, but the member states have decided. Some have decided to continue and develop the nuclear, others have said stop. But it's not here that we're going to decide on that. So our priority now is to make sure that those who actually use nuclear are reflected here, as well as those who don't use it. And so, of course, everyone could improve things. We could have specified if you like. And that's up to the Parliament. Now to move on to financing. Now, I have expressed my views on nuclear publicly, so it's no surprise to you. And I've also actually expressed my views on financing with my friend Paolo Gentilio very, very early on. We raised the alarm saying that the IRA Act in the USA could actually attract a lot of European companies to go over to the US, even though they were intending initially to actually implement them, set up and shop in Europe under clean tech. So it's not stupid for us to actually come up with some type of financing for these companies. So it's a proposal that's been worked on, and now we've developed this policy and we've put it forward. It actually answers to a problem. It responds to a problem. It's very important for us to have a legislative act in this area because all member states must be able to have the same regulations. And my problem with Paolo as well was that some member states have got perhaps more financial means than others. Well, supposedly have more, but everyone's going to have to take loans for this. It's all going to be borrowed money. There is no member state in Europe who is going to be able to make up for the IRA out of their own coffers. They're all going to borrow. Now, someone said that some states have got a lot of money. No, they're going to borrow a lot. So that's a little bracket, but I think you've got to really be realistic. So no one has the money to stand up to the IRA in this case. Everyone's going to have to borrow. Some find it easier than others. Some, for example, might have invested less in defence. So, of course, they've got less debt. Others have perhaps spent more in defence. Now, I'm not going to point fingers, but I'm just saying I'm being objective. My aim is that we don't try and comparing one another saying these are the good boys, these are the bad boys. No, we're all we're all in the same boat here. We all have the same responsibility. And my problem is that I need to make sure that we don't have more capacity in some member states because they can afford more than others who have got too much in debt. So we've tried to come up with something where those who want to participate can do. But we need to have strict, time-limited rules, and that's what we've been doing with my colleague Margaret Vestager. Some countries have got more capacity, and they can use this. We can perhaps tweak the rules, and perhaps some are going to be using Repower EU. They've got policies at home. They're able to shift that slightly to for the infrastructures, energy infrastructures required for certain modules. We're all talking about debt. Renew EU is all debt. It's all borrowed money. So we have to make sure that this money can be used for productive investment. Now, if there are member states that don't have a possibility to do this, then the EIB will have to play its role. And that's where I'd ask you to get on board with me. I'm having a dialogue with the EIB right now. They've got to be able to invest. They're going to have to invest in these interests of common European interest, a project of common European interest. Defence is also like this. That's an IPEC, but the EIB can't actually invest in that. But we can do it because it's a question of our security and our very existence in some cases. The same for green energy. So what we're trying to do is to ensure that we have a consistent and coherent approach. And if there's not enough financing, then of course we're going to have to turn to sovereign funds. We're starting to work on that. We'll come back to you about this in July. But just to say, in the meantime, we've got to give a very clear sign to our industry to say that we're working on this, we're coming up with a solution, and it's up to the legislator now to pass that. Now, I'm summing up these subjects, Christian. So the third thing I wanted to mention was the permit. And indeed, for a lot of companies, a lot of industry, that's really essential because we need to speed up the whole permit process. We need to get going. Now, I know I go a lot to Africa and I know what the situation is. They say to you, yeah, but you Europeans, you want to produce at home, but you come to us to try to steal, and they don't mince their words. You want to steal our raw materials. That's what they say to us, and they say that we're going to produce clean in Europe, but we're going to mess up their environment. So I think yes, we need to be talking to them about saying yes, you should try and convince them to use our methods because. Luckily, we are still very much in favour of the biodiversity and clean energy, and we also have social protection in place for our workers. But we also use technology which is more innovative, which is less destructive, which is greener. So we need to show them what can be done, and then perhaps later at the next stage we can actually enable them to benefit from this. So. Someone mentioned partnerships. We're going to be working in partnership. We will have strategic partnerships. I signed up an agreement with Libya just not so long ago. I signed one as well recently with other countries because we are working with other commissioners as well. We went to the Democratic Republic of Congo. We signed we will sign an agreement there in June. So we are creating global partnerships where the global added value is shared and where we leave behind benefit for these developing countries. Otherwise, how are they ever going to develop? And that's what they said themselves, that their resources will be exhausted. So we need to show that we are also happy to take on board these risks. It's difficult to do that because we're taking a political risk as well to actually help in these developing countries. But it's important that our processes, our technology and our working methods are actually helping in a balanced manner within these partnerships. So we want to accelerate these permits to enable us to work in Europe. So I've suggested a one-stop shop for each project. That is key. We have strategic projects which are going to be clearly identified. We know that they're going to be able to benefit from this accelerated process. It's very laborious for the promoters. We have got various procedures. We've got accelerated procedures in Europe with deadlines to be met. That's all very clear. On the size of the project, we're going to say you have 24 months for a mining operation, and you've got to do that within 24 months. If you don't, then then you don't get the help. And obviously, the burden of proof is being reversed here as well. Very often, people say that the administration is actually dragging its feet, but now we've made it up. We're in a situation where the administration has got to speed up their operations. So we're hoping that all member states will be able to actually also speed up their administrative procedures as well. And this is we're hoping that we'll be able to divide by 2 the amount of time it takes to provide permits for these projects. Christian, I hope that covers everything. I could actually talk at more length, but thank you very much.
Monsieur le commissaire, cher Thierry, merci.
Commissioner, dear Terry, thank you very much for coming along to speak to us today. Thank you for answering all the questions, and thank you for proposing this new, very important initiative. We're going to continue to work on this together. We will be supporting the good proposals that have been put forward. We will be improving the text, and we will be discussing this with Council to ensure that before the end of this parliamentary mandate, we, or as soon as possible,
most of us are thinking in this way. This proposal adopted, and our industry really supported in order to respond to all these challenges. Merci beaucoup encore une fois.
Merci à tous.
Thank you again. Thank you very much.